happy to have you here in a room at Handelshögskolan, University of Gothenburg. So my name is Urban Strandberg, and I'm the co-founder and manager of the International Youth Think Tank, which is one of the organizers of today's seminar. We are co-organizing this seminar with the Department of Law, which is a department at the School of Business, Economics and Law. And also we are co-organizing it together with a student-led organization called Brännpunkt Europa. That will present themselves in a bit. So let me say a few words about the IYTT, which is the background for today's seminar. And then I will present to you what the seminar is all about. And then I will present the first speaker. And let me also underline that you who are in the stream, hopefully you are in the stream. We have a technical problem, but hopefully we have you up and going now. I really don't know that, but that's the way it is. Anyway, the IYTT is a democracy-promoting organization. You know, we are living in times when democracy is challenged by different reasons. And we founded the IYTT 2019 and thinking, why don't we ask young people, and we define young as people from 18 and up to 24, why don't we ask them to come up with kind of a little bit of new arguments why democracy is the best thing that we could have, but also come up with new ideas on how to improve democracy, where there is democracy, and why don't we also ask them to tell us how we could democratize countries which are not democratic already. So that is the IYTT in a nutshell. But actually, it's one more thing, and that is we are also trying to incentivize and inspire people. Because, you know, in established democracies all over the world, people, citizens, are not that active as one would assume and that one would like them to be. So the other task that the IYTT is taking upon is to try to incentivize people to be more active as citizens. So the IYTT runs like this. Every year we are admitting 24 young persons and we train them through a week-long conference, and after that they present a dozen of proposals that is about democracy renewal. And if they then want to be continuing to be engaged in the IYTT, they will write working papers and policy briefs and go to different conferences in the world to present those proposals to inspire powerful people. And what you will have today, as part of the seminar, you will meet 3 of our youth fellows, because that is the mentioning of the young persons engaged in the IYTT. We call them youth fellows. 3 of our youth fellows will be part of the program. They will present to you some of their proposals and ideas about democracy. So you will have some really tangible personal examples of what it is to be a youth fellow of the IYTT. And just to mention the numbers, I think, because that is a little bit striking. Here in the room today, we are in Sweden, and the IYTT was set up with the headquarters in Gothenburg. But the majority of the youth fellows of the IYTT, they are living in many different countries. And you know, last year, which was our 5th year, we had 540 individuals from 68 countries applying for the 24 spots. So there you have a number on how we have been capable of reaching out to young persons in 1/3 of the world's countries. So that is the background of the IYTT. Today, this is the 2nd lunch seminar in a series of 4 that we are throwing off this spring. And the theme of today is we are addressing democratic disenchantment, which you could see on the slide behind me. And what we are meaning by that is that the established institutions of representative democracy in the countries which are democratic are not really functioning as well as they should do. So there is a problem with democracy, and that we need to discuss thoroughly. So the first thing that you will soon have is a talk by Professor Folke Tersman, who will map out what he thinks are important parts of a democracy in decline, a democracy in a crisis situation. After that, I would invite the 3 youth fellows which are here with us today. And we will all 5 of us, the speaker, Folke, myself, and the 3 youth fellows, be sitting here. And the youth fellows will first give comments on the speak, and then they will present to you how they think that we could renew democracy, to do something good for having a better democracy for the future. Eventually, and very importantly, we will open up the floor for your comments and questions in relation to our speaker and to our youth fellows. So this is what you have to expect for this lunch seminar. We will end by 1:30, and if it is the case that you will have to dash away because you have something to do, that is just as it is. So that is no problem at all. So once again, a warm, warm welcome. And before introducing our main speaker, I want to ask Brännpunkt Europa co-chair Lisa Lundgren, who actually also happened to be a youth fellow of the IYTT since 2021. So Lisa, please say a few words about the student organization Brännpunkt Europa.
My name is Lisa. I'm from the student-led organization Brännpunkt Europa, and I'm also involved in the international youth think tank, just like Urban said. So I just want to briefly wish everyone welcome here on the behalf of Brännpunkt. We are, if you didn't know, an organization that organizes lunch lectures and seminars on topics like politics, societal issues, democracy, European policy. And I want to encourage you, of course, to follow us on our social medias, stay updated on our future events, including the upcoming 2 Gothenburg Democracy Talks that we're co-hosting with the IYTT. So yeah, you can find us here. And once again, warm welcome. Enjoy today's lecture.
Thank you, Lisa. So, let me introduce our speaker of today, Folke Tersman. Please, Folke. So Folke is a professor of philosophy at Uppsala University. But even more than that, you are the deputy director of the Institute for Future Studies in Stockholm, which is a very interesting institution, which are in different ways trying to do research and spark discussions on where we are heading for the future in different challenging areas. So you have a wonderful combination of your thorough philosophical research and being the leading figure in this very multidisciplinary institute in Stockholm. So Folke, we are so happy to have you here, and you have 35, tops 40 minutes at your disposal, and if you would talk longer than that, I will stop you.
Okay.
So a warm, warm welcome.
Thank
and
you.
now the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to sit here. The PowerPoint, it's just with the arrows. When I was young, there were no computers. So. And thank you so much, Urban, and all of you for inviting me and for giving me the opportunity to contribute to this fantastic initiative that Urban talked about. I think this is what the world needs more of. So I'm glad to be here and be able to talk to you. And as Urban said, I'm working at the Institute for Future Studies. Nothing happens.
It did. Push another one.
Good. Okay. Which is an interdisciplinary, independent but government-funded research foundation. So we focus on the long-term perspective. The foundation was actually part of the government in the 1970s, but they threw us out, not me at that time, because the ideas were too radical, they thought, the politicians at the time. But what we are doing is to focus on, to try to say something about the possible implications of the decisions we make today for the long-term future. So we cover all sorts of issues, from, a little bit boring ones, perhaps, such as how the pension system will be affected by the changing demographics. Doesn't sound so exciting, but up till discussions about how to communicate with aliens if they were to visit us, but also everything in between. I mean, the emergence of new technologies, AI, for example, climate change, obviously, problems of segregation and integration in our society, and the development of democracy, what's happening with democracy, which is what I'm going to talk about today. I should also say that in this environment, mostly social scientists work, but we also have people from the natural sciences and the humanities. So it's a good interdisciplinary environment in the sense that people actually collaborate. They don't just say that they're going to collaborate, which is needed in the case of these questions. So the point of departure of my talk is the decline of democracy, which is something that happens globally since, shall we say, the heyday of democracy in 2003 up to 10, perhaps. Everything looked very promising. The share of people living in democracy expanded, and so on and so forth. After that, we have had a decline. And that process is monitored by what probably is the best database in the world about those issues, namely Varieties of Democracy, VDEM, which is hosted here. So since it's a Gothenburg thing, I'm not going to talk so much about their activities, but there is one thing I want to say about their findings. So the report is full of information, such as these pieces of information. Now, 71% live in autocracies, as contrasted with 2003, when just 50% did. We have a number of countries who are going from being democratic to autocratizing, and so on. So it doesn't look very good. The report also contains much more nuanced claims, of course, about how democracy is dismantled and so on. So this is more like, I don't know, to make you, to get attention, I mean, these figures. So, I mean, one thing to note about the claim on the, or sort of figure at the bottom of the page is that it, to make sense of figures like that, we need some division between democracies and autocracies. We need to distinguish countries. And a problem with that is that whether a democracy, as on most accounts, whether a democracy is to be classified as a democracy is rooted, depends on features of the political system and society at large, which can obtain in degrees. I mean, the quality of elections, the extent to which freedom of speech is constrained, and so on and so forth, the independence of the legal system. So one possible conceptual conclusion from that would be to say that we should stop talking about democracies and autocracies. We should talk about degrees of democraticity, basically. But if we do that and skip these absolute, as it were, types of claims, then we can't make sense of a figure like that. To make sense of it, we need thresholds, and they are more or less arbitrary, of course. This is no criticism of VDEM at all. I mean, they have good reasons for introducing thresholds, but you should remember that what it means is that relatively small changes might lead to radical differences of this kind. If, say, 10 countries go from being slightly above the threshold to slightly below, then that is going to have a huge impact on figures like this one. So take India, for example. I mean, India, in my view, it's a miracle that India has remained a democracy for so long after the independence. I mean, it's an astonishing achievement. I mean, compared to retaining democracy in a country like Sweden, 10 million people, that's nothing. A billion people, more than a billion, 1.4, I think, lives in India right now. And there have been problems with the Indian democracy, of course, before. But now those concerns have developed in such a way that they have dropped below the threshold, VDEM's threshold, as it were, which means that the share of the world population living in autocracies, boom, goes up. So you should take it with a pinch of salt, although it is significant. But remember that. What is more important, however, is that we can get a more hopeful picture, optimistic picture about the world, if we also consider other types of data than those considered by VDEM. So we in Stockholm actually also have a great database. And the Institute hosts it, or one of its hubs, namely, and I'm sure you have heard of it, the World Values Survey. The World Values Survey has monitored attitudes of people all across the globe since the 1970s. So it has a lot of data about attitudes towards all sorts of things and long time series to look at. And what this data suggests is that there is a continuous global trend towards more liberal opinions in the world. So it confirms sort of the, this quote from Martin Luther King, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Here is one example. Attitudes towards homosexuality have increasingly become more tolerant. So here the question posed to the respondents is like something like, do homosexuals have a right to live according to their own values and their own lifestyle, something like that. And you see that the amount of people who think so has gone up. This does not only, which is significant, does not only hold for democracies, it also holds for autocracies, such as Saudi Arabia, for example. Of course, the tolerance initially there was pretty low, but it has followed this curve. And the same holds for other types of issues like intergroup marrying, reproductive freedoms, religious influence over education, free speech, the acceptance of people saying things that you don't like, and so on and so forth. And I invite you actually to look at the VVS website yourselves. The data is open, and so you can see these data. Don't take my word for it, just look at it. And what is more, there is reason to think that this process will continue, at least according to a model which one of our researchers, Pontus Strimling, was previously a mathematician, he's now sort of he's an interdisciplinary guy, so he's now like an anthropologist, sociologist, all over the place. The model he has developed, he and his team, explains the data in World Value Survey, but makes also certain rather specific predictions to the effect that liberal opinions will become even more common in the future, that this is going to, it's going to make, hopefully, from a liberal perspective, Martin Luther King's prediction bear out. So the underlying thought of this model is that opinions and opinion trends are driven by the fundamental values that people are committed to. And the fact that people form different opinions about many social issues is due to the fact that they embrace different fundamental values. So this is going to be a bit simplified, look at this paper and the rest of his texts, which you can find on the website. But I'm still going to give you this sort of simplified picture. So, in the case of the liberal tradition, we can speak of three fundamental values. Welfare, what that means is really that harm is something important. So take, should we have a strict policy against drug use? Well, if it turns out that strict policies against drug use actually cause more drug deaths than less strict policies, then that's a strong argument against these strict policies, according to liberalism, or these liberal values. So it's harm. We're looking at, not maximizing perhaps, but promoting the general welfare in a society. That's an important consideration. Freedom, individual freedom to let people live their lives the way they want to, but also fairness and equality. In this image here, perhaps in the first instance, equality in the face of the law and the legal system. In the case of decision making, that's where democracy comes in, but also, depending on your brand of liberalism, of course, in the distribution of material resources and opportunities of various kind. In the conservative camp, we have other values, tradition, as it is manifested in old institutions in society or ways of living, the monarchy, the church, that sort of thing. The idea that individual freedom is important, perhaps, but not. It should also be weighed against the importance of the nation, and there are values such as honor, to do your part, or to defend your nation, and so on and so forth. And the third value, religion or purity. Purity is used to mean certain ideas, religious ideas about that it's very important that life is following a certain route. People shouldn't deviate, and so on and so forth. You should live by some simple maxim, perhaps. It's interesting in this. I mean, one might wonder, why are some people conservatives and others liberals? Maybe it has to do with some more fundamental psychological traits or differences between people. So there is some psychological research, maybe you heard from it, about it, that conservatives are much more sensitive than liberals to messiness, such as on this table here, or bad smells and stuff like that. Interesting, but I'm not sure if it's true. The psychological research isn't very extensive. Okay, so we have these different values. Now, the simple observation that Pontus' model is based on is that there is a significant difference between liberals and conservatives, namely this. Liberals don't assign any weight at all to the conservative values, whereas conservatives, although they are most strongly perhaps committed to these values, they also assign weight to the liberal values. It's just that they have some weight, they have perhaps more weight, but this is enough to predict that in the long run, the opinions that can be based on the fundamental liberal values are going to become more popular. So that's the difference that explains the liberal trend over time, according to that model. So, there are some social issues where these values, tradition, nationalism, and so on, are not applicable at all. In that case, it's like open, öppet mål, open goal for those pursuing more liberal policies. In the case of those where the applicability is more ambiguous, you get another sort of trend, and that's a part of the model. It has also been confirmed by the data in WVS. Now, this might seem too good to be true, right? Especially today, when we are looking at the world. Can this really be true? For example, how are we on this picture to explain the successes of right-wing populist parties in Europe and elsewhere? So one interpretation of their successes is, of course, that people have become less liberal and tolerant towards immigrants, and that's why they are now voting for right-wing extremist parties. But there is also an alternative interpretation, which is consistent with the data in the WVS, namely that there have always been people across the board in all the conventional parties that have had these attitudes. It's just that when the conventional parties become more liberal, they don't any longer feel at home in those parties. So they are finding a new home, a common home, where they cluster, as it were. And the new home is provided by the right-wing extremist parties. And this interpretation is also, I can come back to that, it is also confirmed by a lot of data. So this is a study we did in 2018 about the Swedish Democrats. So Swedish Democrats is the sort of right-wing party in Sweden, right? And we examined their attitudes, and it turned out that, so we looked at Social Democrats generally, what do they think? We looked at Swedish Democrats, what do they think? And we looked at those who had gone from being Social Democrats to being Swedish Democrats. And we see a clear overlap here. So the Swedish Democrats who used to be Social Democrats, they share, the Swedish Democrats' views on many issues. So immigration should cease. Among Social Democrats generally, a minority believes so. But in the group of people who moved, a majority thought so, like the Swedish Democrats. Feminism has gone too far. Yeah, same thing. So what we are seeing is not that people in general have become less liberal. What we are seeing is that the conventional parties have become more liberal, and therefore those who even initially had these more illiberal attitudes left and went to another political party. Okay, so that then is consistent with the data from the WVS. So why did the voters not leave earlier? Why does that happen now? Well, partly because the conventional parties have become more liberal. We now have a law which is up for decision about gender transition, which almost all political parties in the government are about to pass that law. We'll see what happens, but that wouldn't have happened in the 1970s, for example. Also because, I guess, these questions about immigration have come up further on the agenda because of the refugee crisis in 2015. So if we assume that the WVS picture is on the right track, then one might wonder how can it be reconciled with the VDEM's picture about the decline of democracy. There is no strict inconsistency here, of course, but there is at least a tension that calls for an explanation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about potential candidates for explanation. So what a lot of people say is that people, when times get tough, people turn to a strong man. You recognize these people, it's Mussolini in the middle, who they think will solve their problems. So the idea here is that there is a conception that democratic governments can't really solve their problems due to the constant need of compromises, the cumbersomeness of the democratic process, and the difficulty of today of forming strong majority governments, due to the fact that the electorate is so divided. I'm saying that there is a conception that democratic governments fail to solve people's problems, or perhaps more so than authoritarian. But whether it's true or not, that's another question. It's far from clear. The idea here might be that people realize that authoritarian regimes have different measures at their disposal compared to the democratic ones. They can impose laws very quickly, they can enforce them because of the security police or whatever, and therefore they can act more efficiently. And that's true in some cases. So here is an example. Francesca knows who I'm talking about, I guess. When Mussolini came into power, he wanted to eradicate the mafia on Sicily. So he appointed this person as a police prefect, and who was particularly ruthless and cruel, obviously, but used those traits to really fight the mafia, and succeeded very well, we might say, at a great moral cost, but succeeded very well. All but eradicated the mafia in Sicily during Mussolini's reign, or at least exported it to the United States. So this quote here, it's a play with words. Mi chiamo mori, va fare morire, morire, kill. Well, you understand that. But democratic governments, of course, also have advantages in terms of efficiency. For example, and this is very important to remember, people in democracies are more likely to comply to the laws that have been passed, even without coercion. So that saves a lot of resources to do that. And that's sometimes forgotten, I would say, because people generally get a skewed picture about democracy due to the media, which tend to focus on the problems rather than the successes. It's always more interesting to talk about the problems. That said, there are also problems, of course, that democratic governments can't address, such as climate change. We know that. They can't address it because what you do in one nation state is not going to solve the problem. You need to coordinate with other countries, and the instruments for coordination aren't good at the moment. So that's where we are. And of course, the same holds for authoritarian regimes. So they don't have greater chances of doing something. Quite the contrary, as they tend to ignore them. But I think that might be the appeal of the strongman. That the strongmen say that things are basically okay, at least with the strongman in charge. Remember Trump's, I alone can fix it. Leave it to me. And the strongman also says that all these problems, you don't need to worry about it, like climate change. They don't have to be fixed. So we don't have to worry. Maybe that's the appeal. It's not our responsibility any longer. It's a little bit like when you were a child and you looked at your parents and they looked cool and calm and they said everything is okay. So you don't have to think for yourself. The second explanation I wanted to bring up is corruption. And we all know that there's generally much less corruption in democratic states compared to in autocracies. At the same time, however, I think that it might be argued that the incidence of corruption in democracies reflect more badly on democratic governments than in autocracies. Corruption is not something surprising in an autocracy. Well, it's a big disappointment in a democracy, given the values about equality that are sort of democracy is supposed to be based upon. So it's seen as a kind of hypocrisy. I mean, take Trump again. I mean, I think he said that he could just shoot anyone on Fifth Avenue in New York and people would still vote for him. I think he was right. People forgive him because we already know that he's an asshole, basically. Whereas regular politicians would sort of be keel-hauled if they were to act similarly. So maybe something like that. And even if there is less corruption in democracies, it does occur. And some of it exploits the very democratic system, the system that makes democracies distinct. One type of criticism from autocrats is that have had a significant effect on voters is that the democracy is a sham because the system is rigged, right? In favor of the elites, the deep state, and so on, which controls the decision-making mechanism. And unfortunately, that seems to be true to some extent, at least in some democratic states like the United States. So that's at least suggested by a study by two political scientists, Martin Gilens and Benjamin Page. What they did, this was in 2014, 10 years ago. What they did was to examine 1,799 or so decisions, political decisions in the US at all levels of government, president down to more local areas. So they wanted to explore who exercised the most influence. Was it the average voter, as the political scientists usually say, or was it the middle class, or the labor unions, or lobby groups, and so on? And what they found was this, that there is a very strong correlation between the decisions and the wishes of the 5% richest people in society, regardless of who actually made the decision, whether it be Democrats or Republicans, and regardless of what the rest of the citizens wanted. I mean, the middle class, for example, or those who are just below 5%. Okay, and in the US, there's a pretty straightforward explanation of this, of course, because to be an elected politician, you need donations. But we see similar things in Germany, for example, and we are looking at Sweden as well, and there are other sort of related mechanisms that underlie this, we believe. I mean, for example, the fact that the politician, a minister of healthcare, for example, goes afterwards directly to some private corporation which is benefiting from healthcare and so on. So what these findings suggest is a lack of sensitivity to the preferences of the majority, which obviously goes against the very idea of democracy. And this is how they formulate their conclusion. I mean, I think when you realize that this is the case, it doesn't really matter what you do, what you believe. I mean, even if it's said in a democracy that you matter, you realize that you don't really. I mean, that's going to be very demoralizing, obviously, and perhaps motivate reactions like just voting for anyone so the elites get to get the elites' attention. So that obviously fits with the Trump phenomenon. So the third factor I wanted to bring up is affective polarization. I'm not going to talk about that too much. Affective, it means that not only that people disagree, but that they really hate each other and don't want to discuss with each other and so on and so forth. And I used to think that this was more like an epiphenomenon, but I now think that it does probably, it's a driver, it's an independent driver of democratic decline. I mean, there are psychological mechanisms that are triggered through social media in all the ways that we have now talked about for years, algorithms and filter bubbles and so on. So that is a real problem that we need to address in some way. And the fourth explanation I wanted to bring up is what I mentioned in connection with the strongman as well. There are these problems that national governments cannot any longer solve for people. In the 1970s, national governments had much more latitude in affecting the conditions of their citizens. Today, due to globalization, due to the types of problems that we are facing, this is no longer so. So part of the problem is that we face these tragedies of the common. So climate change is a case in point. We are jointly causing outcomes through the fact that nation states act independently of each other to benefit or promote their own self-interest, basically. But by doing so, they cause jointly an outcome which is much worse for all compared to if all had acted differently. Overfishing is one example. There are all sorts of examples, antibiotics resistance, and so on and so forth. Or take AI, for example. Now, there are worries, there are concerns about what will happen when these artificial general intelligence might be developed in not so many years. So what should we do about it? Well, perhaps we should stop, but if we stop, what does China do? So we can't do that. So we are in the same sort of situation. We are acting in our self-interest, but all of us are doing that. But by doing that, we are jointly causing an outcome which might be catastrophic. So no single state, democratic or not, can save its own population from, say, the effects of climate change or the bad possible effects of AI being rushed and so on. What is needed to address that problem is obviously a better tools for coordination at the global level by ensuring ensuring policies that can be enforced at that global level, and we lack that today. We have the United Nations system, of course, but it's as we know, it's not very powerful. So these are the four factors that I think help to explain at least why we observe this decline of democracy, even given what the World Value Survey suggests, namely that there is a trend towards more liberalism in the world. What the trend towards liberal values in the world means, I think, is that we do have a chance to turn this around, that we could do something about it. But we need to address the considerations that these explanations invoke in some way. And, you know, I don't have any new solutions to come with. Lots of people have discussed this for many years. I just wanted to end by noting that many of these efforts that people, I mean, this work is underway, people are working on this, Urban and his crew here, you are working, that's excellent, and zillions of others, so you're not alone, as you know. But they sort of fall under two categories. So what we can do is we can do all sorts of things, of course, but we can revitalize local national democracy. So I'm personally very, in mature democracies, I'm personally very positive towards these citizens' assemblies that they try in countries like France and the UK as well, and many other places. I think that's a way forward. What is good about this is that they are addressing affective polarization, because if you get people together from different paths of life, and they have a task to do, to come with a proposal which politicians need to take into account, then usually people start to respect each other again. So we need these fora to get people to meet and talk to each other again. So that's obviously one thing. But I'm not going to talk about that because you are going to talk about that, right? Instead, I wanted to say that this has to be combined with efforts to retake the political initiative, the political influence over decisions. Today, due to the global world, one problem that national governments face is that investors or these multinational companies, they can blackmail national governments. They can say that if you don't lower our taxes, I mean, we have I read today about this fight between the Swedish tax authority and all these risk capitalists. It's going on. So they can say, if you don't do what we say, we're just moving somewhere else. Okay, so that's a big problem. We need to address that, and we can do that by developing democracy, global governance at a global level, creating political institutions that allow us to collaborate better. And the image here is, can anyone see what it is? It's the Galactic Senate from the Star Wars. That's not perhaps a very utopian thing, but I couldn't find a better image. I mean, this is going to take a while, of course. I mean, we have countries like China and the US. They don't want to give up their sovereignty. But there are incremental steps that we can take in this direction. I mean, for a long time, people have discussed and made some progress regarding the establishment of an international environmental court, like the International Criminal Court, for example, that could enforce agreements regarding the environment. There is also this initiative to establish a symbolic parliamentary assembly besides the General Assembly at the UN, where people are elected. Okay. At the start, perhaps, and this is underway actually. At the start, this assembly doesn't have to get any real power, but still it's going to be source of legitimacy. That's exactly how the parliaments worked in the beginning of before democracy, as it were. So once the legitimacy has sort of grown, now Urban is going out. But I have a little quote here. Then it can acquire more power, and each incremental step is going to be helpful, I think. So could I end by reading something? Okay. So we are in a very special situation. They were also in a very special situation. So this might sound like science fiction, but they were also in a very special situation after the Second World War. We have forgotten that now, but there were really radical proposals that were discussed by powerful people. So, for example, the Republican Party in the late 1940s, they wanted to put all the nuclear weapons under UN control. Okay. And several chiefs of, elected leaders, high political leaders, they wanted this world parliament. So this is what Ernest Bevin, who was a British foreign minister, said in 1945. We need a study for the purpose of creating a world assembly elected directly from the people of the world as a whole, to whom the governments who form the United Nations are responsible, and who, in fact, make the world law, which they, the people, will then accept and be morally bound and willing to carry out. For it will be from their votes that the power will have been derived, and it will be for their direct representatives to carry out. So this is imagine someone saying that today. But this was the foreign minister in one of the world powers. So I think we should try to look outside of the box a little bit. Thank you so much for listening.
So, thank you so much, Folke. And why don't you take a seat on the red chair? And you have offered us a very broad and partly provocative outlook of the democracy challenges. And as you were saying, you wouldn't have any solutions. But that's why we are here, because the IYTT is about providing solutions. So I'm now happy to invite here with us 3 youth fellows. So why don't you come here and sit down, and I will present you to the audience. So, starting with Lisa Mastio, who comes from Germany, working in Düsseldorf as a speechwriter and an advisor to state parliamentarian. And you joined the IYTT in 2019, which was our first conference, and you have been engaged in different IYTT endeavors ever since. I'm so happy to have you here, Lisa. Welcome.
Thank you.
Franklin Wacke, who is a British citizen, who also joined the IYTT the same year as Lisa, 2019, and who is presently studying for a bachelor's degree in philosophy in London.
Yep.
Lovely to have you, Franklin.
Thank you.
And then Francesca Bonomo, who is a freshwoman in the IYTT, because you came to our last year's conference in Barcelona. And when you're not an IYTT Youth Fellow, you're studying law in Trento in the northern part of Italy. Thank you for being here with us, Francesca. So what now will happen, we will have 2 rounds of comments from these lovely Youth Fellows. In the first round, they will give a little bit of commenting on what Folke has brought up in his speech, one at a time, starting with Franklin, going on with Francesca, and ending up with Lisa. And after that commenting round, they will have a second round when they will present to you what the IYTT have been developing as proposals to do something good to improve democracy for the future. So that is how we proceed with this. So why don't you start, Franklin, with some comments on what you heard from Folke?
So thank you for that talk, Folke. It was a lot to cover. You took a very wide approach. And although I've been asked to comment, I'd actually quite like to ask a question. So you spoke about effective polarization, and my intuition is that actually this is a very substantive driver of democratic decline, as you said, and that these political conflicts seem to turn on very kind of superficial or very thin views and conflicts and distinctions that people have with one another. And so I wonder, A, what you think drives effective polarization, and B, is there any sustainable solution, or is it a natural part of running a large society?
Okay, thank you. Can I? No?
Very briefly, very briefly.
Well, yeah, as you suggest, I mean, polarization can emerge from an issue which isn't very important. I mean, that's interesting. So people can hate each other because they have different sides regarding something they don't really ultimately care so much about. So it's free floating from the issues, basically. That's interesting. Sometimes the issues are important, sometimes not. So that means that the scope for reasoning is going to be very limited, right? And I think what drives it is this. I think what people want. I mean, this is also speculation, but we want meaning, and one source of meaning is this in-group, out-group thing. I mean, just go to a football match and you see it. And especially now when we feel that so much is, the climate change. What are we going to do about it? What's the point? And then we can get meaning from these types of divides. That's what I think. What we can do about it, I think, and there's robust psychological evidence, if we get people together and if they work on a mutual task, they have joint responsibility for something, then these feelings, they can quite quickly go away, actually. It's interesting. Thanks for that question.
Okay, Francesca.
Thank you. I think you gave a lot of ideas on very different topics, and I think that helps us singularly develop and further the hints you gave. And I wanted to focus on the reference you made to Cesare Mori, which I feel very close to since I am Sicilian.
Yeah, you know much more about it, so I was very courageous.
And I'm also focusing on criminal law during my studies. So Cesare Mori was sent by Mussolini to Sicily to defy mafia, which represented a threat to the authoritarian regime, because mafia works like a parastate, a state within the state, that through terror and through different means, as granting people work, granting people goods, and granting people services, develops in a territory where the state is not that present, as a peripheric territory as Sicily could be, which is an island at the bottom of the peninsula. So Cesare Mori was sent there to defy the mafia and to make the authoritarian regime more powerful in the Sicilian territory. And the means that the professor cited were killing, of course, the representatives of the mafia families. And the idea of defying the mafia to make the state, the democratic state, reach the population in peripheral areas is a great idea. The means are not the best ones. Mafia is also a form of corruption. It's scattered in all institutions, especially now, which mafia has changed the way it works. And I think that the effort to defy corruption and to defy parastatal organization that make it harder for democratic institutions to reach the singular individual have to be talked through, and they have to come from a democratic performance within institutions. And because stronger institutions and stronger political values between society and between people make a stronger democracy that can survive all the different undulations that you showed in your charters. And even though the libertarian ideas are kind of destined to be prevailing in the future, that does not mean we should rely on that charter and not put the maximum effort to it. So thank you for the hints.
Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca. Lisa.
Yeah, I would also like to thank you for your great presentation. If I talk for myself, I will take some of the points home with me, and going to research again, I really like to get new inputs on that. And I would like to comment on one challenge you mentioned. You said that Democrats don't have the solutions for the big issues that we have in the world, but autocrats don't have them either. So they seem to have the easy solution, and we have to work that people don't believe these easy solutions, and that they realize that only by working together we at least come closer to a solution. But there is no easy solution to climate change and all these big issues that we have. So yeah, I really enjoyed that part of your presentation, and you built a perfect bridge for what we are presenting today. You said we need people to come together, and they need to discuss issues, and with that we will gain respect again in society. And I guess that's exactly what we will talk about now. So I guess that's a perfect bridge to go on.
It's definitely a perfect bridge. So thank you, Lisa. So to give you now, to prepare you to what you will have presented, this is also to tell you about the working method of the IYTT. As I told you when we started it all, we have a youth conference, a very condensed conference in 4 days, which is issuing proposals for democratic renewal. What we then do afterwards, we take up 1 or 2 of the proposals and do some more homework, some more grounded investigation. So today you will soon describe what that means. So in the 2019 conference, Franklin and Lisa and the others, they proposed one thing, and that was to say, why don't we have more citizens' assemblies or community assemblies? That could be a good thing for renewing democracy. So what we did was that we commissioned a researcher to write up a working paper, as you can see here, with a pretty long title. It was commissioned to postdoc researchers Jonathan Geib, where he goes through the literature, which is about, in his wording, mini-publics. So what does the research say? Is it really feasible to improve democracy with such institutions? So in a bit, you will hear a little bit about that by Franklin. What we then do in the process is that, you know, as I told you, huge numbers of people are applying to our conferences. As the example of last year, 540 individuals, but we only select 24. The rest of them, we ask them if they want to be on our panel. Meaning that when we are developing the proposals like I'm describing now, we would send round questions to the panelists to see what they think about mini-publics and citizens' community assemblies. And that you will see, Francesca soon will present a little bit what people were saying in that panel when we asked them about this thing about community assemblies. And then eventually, with this as a background, a thorough research in the working paper, the results from the youth panel, we issue a policy brief. A policy brief is a brief memorandum suggesting something very tangible. In this case, suggesting to policymakers to start organizing community assemblies to renew democracy. And that is what you will hear more about when Lisa is giving the word. So this is the process and the procedures, and here you see the front pages of the two different publications. So with this, I will then give the word to you, Franklin, to say a few words about the working paper.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to get a sense of the room. Who voted in the last Swedish national elections, by show of hands? Okay, quite a lot of you. I think in this room, there are more people that voted in the last election than I know back in London, basically, in my extended social circle. I'm one of these democratically disenfranchised people, so I'm not voting in the next election. I haven't registered to vote. I've decided that I find it a little bit pointless. You walk into a voting booth, you tick a piece of paper, you come out, you stuff that piece of paper into a container. It's all very abstracted. And I think people feel the same across the world. You know, when we talk about democratic disenfranchisement, we talk about it as a growing problem. Especially, I think, young people are feeling more disenfranchised than ever before. And I think a lot of this comes down to how we've structured liberal democracy. It's a kind of abstracted process. Hannah Arendt describes it as a buyer-seller relationship, where the politicians are selling you a certain proposal, and you sit there and you buy. I mean, at best, you're an evaluative agent. At worst, you're a receptive agent. You're just receiving the policies. You're not really contributing as a citizen might. Jonathan Guy's paper is a masterclass in summarizing literature. It's brilliant, it's very dense, but what I want to provide to you now are three principled cases for what are called mini-publics. Now, mini-publics a mini-public is a kind of concept. So you take a small group of people, large enough to be representative of the population at large, but small enough that individuals can feel that they have some kind of power in this group, or that their voices are listened to. And it's between 50 to 100 people. So in this room, we could form a mini-public, if you like. And you might know them as community assemblies, or citizens' assemblies, citizens' juries, things like that. So that's the kind of thing I'm discussing today. The three cases I want to put forward for mini-publics. The first is public spiritedness. And I've stripped the term from Montesquieu. And he has this idea vaguely that the central characteristic of monarchy is worship. The central characteristic of an aristocracy, an oligarchy, is fear and deference and corruption. But the central characteristic of democracy, the essential characteristic of democracy, is public spiritedness. I want to explain this by way of a thought experiment. So you've got two nations. They're both exactly the same in every way, except one is a democracy, a deliberative democracy, and the other is run under benevolent dictatorship. I think, in spite of all those conditions being exactly the same, I think, nonetheless, the citizens that live under those two different systems would be quite different in character. And that's because I think democracy produces certain incentives to think in universals, to think according to some moral intuitions or moral principles that we have. When you say, as a citizen, that the state ought to do something, you're saying that it ought to do it for everyone. And I think this comment or this frame has a moral character that I think is really the heart of public spiritedness. Representative democracy doesn't quite achieve that, whereas I think in a room where you are discussing, where you're creating and giving, which is what I think moral action is all about, I think that public spiritedness really develops. The second point I want to talk about is public engagement. In the UK, the Labour Party is quite pro-citizens' assemblies because they want to use it to break deadlocks. This is how it was in Ireland as well. They want it to break political deadlocks on controversial issues. So for the Labour Party, it was house building and gender recognition reform. There's two ways of reading this. I think there's a cynical view that you just need to get people in a room, work with them so they get to the right answer. Where I think this kind of impinges on the integrity of the mini-public. And so I think when we discuss mini-publics or citizens' assemblies and things like that, it's worth rejecting this kind of... It's worth positing the cynical reading and rejecting it entirely, that we want these systems, these structures with integrity where people can be truly free and open and discuss with each other. But it also... But the public engagement, the nice reading, the one that I have anyway, is a little bit like a solution to what Folke described as a effective polarization. I think a lot of the hard political problems actually turn on very thin, very superficial distinctions of feelings that people have, enmity that people have towards each other. And so when you get people in a room, in any capacity in some ways, but when you get people in a room, they seem to really burrow into the substance. Now, it helps to be led with policy experts and things like that. So you really want to end up with an informed conversation and a two-way conversation. And the third point, and the one I personally like the most, is that I think mini-publics provide the conditions to unleash public imagination, public creativity. I don't want to say that everyone's a little bit creative if they have the right conditions, but what I do want to say is that there are some people in the population that are creative, that aren't in the policy sphere, that don't have an avenue to express that creativity in the state. And so with mini-publics, you give them the platform, the opportunity to deploy their natural talent for creativity to maximize policy generation. And if nothing else, right, I think it's worth it for that reason alone, because the more creativity you have, the more policies you generate, the better the state operates, the better politics is, the more dynamic our states and governance structures are. So yeah, and the other thing is, of course, when you extend the group of people that can generate policy, you move policy generation away from what I'll call an incestuous policy circle, where everyone knows each other, everyone has the same kind of instincts and intuitions about things, to a much broader population of people. And so, yeah, so I think those are the three principal cases. I think if this has convinced anyone, you should go on and read Jonathan's paper, which covers some of the strategy and questions of implementation, which my colleague Lisa will also cover later. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Franklin. So, Francesca, what about the youth panel?
Yes, so I will go through the feedback that young people gave to the Citizens' Assembly's proposal, or the mini-public proposal, and this was done through 4 questions. The first one is that, do you believe that citizens' assemblies would have an impact on political decision? And the answers regarded the possibility of citizens' assembly to act as autonomous deliberation forums, to influence decision-making and to give different perspective in the democratic discourse within a country. The second question is that, do you believe that citizens' assemblies would improve the quality of political decisions? The positive answers were regarding the possibility to minimize the difference between the political class and the society, which in some countries is a very big issue due to differences in wealth of citizens and politicians or in education. It also could have the possibility to grant a greater involvement of people in the democratic debate and to give an alternative advocacy tool to people. The third question is if citizens' assemblies would enhance the influence of people that are underrepresented through regular parliamentary democracy. Negative answers in this case were particularly interesting. As a matter of fact, some of the young people questioned highlighted that some problems would still remain the same. We are talking about underrepresentation mostly of minorities. So people that do not have access to democratic bodies, to democratic participation, because they lack means and resources. This lack cannot be fulfilled with citizens' assemblies, but it has to be addressed independently. And citizens' assembly would not represent a solution to corruption, which also has to be addressed separately. And the fourth question, and the last question, is if they would increase trust in political decision-making. And the positive answers were about community and integration, a better sense of participation of everyone in the political decision-making, and the possibility to have a bigger sample of population participating in lawmaking and in proposing new ideas. As we can see from a very visual point of view in the slide behind me, all the charters show a pattern. There's a sort of 80 to 20 ratio between positive and negative answers, positive and negative feedback regarding the possibility to implement citizens' assemblies. And what can be seen from the elaborate answers that the youth panelists had the chance to give is that the negative answers mostly refer to countries such as Spain, Italy, or Latin American and African countries. So what I was wondering is if we should see a pattern in that, and if we should invent new ways to address the implementation of mini-publics in very different kind of societies, especially if we talk about a European point of view, so a group of countries with very different values, very different kind of people, but in which the democratic disenchantment is a problem in the same way. And all in all, I would consider this representation as a very positive feedback, a very strong belief that young people have in the implementation of citizens' assembly and the possibility to implement some forms of direct democracy.
Thank you, Francesca. So now we have had the research, we have had the youth panel, and now we will have Lisa, who will tell you about what the IYTT Youth Fellows are proposing of doing concretely.
Perfect. Yeah, concluding what we already heard, we came up with a policy brief on community assemblies, and our main goal with that policy brief is to incentivize policymakers with that, as we see that community assemblies are a holistic tool and a complementary approach to representative democracy. Community assemblies give citizens the possibility to actively engage in the democratic system next to just the ballot, as we already heard in Franklin's presentation. And to regain the trust in democracy or in the democratic system, we should start at a municipal level and make community assemblies solve the issues that you have in the local society or in the local community. Therefore, we propose that 25 to 30 participants, which are chosen through stratified random sampling, to be the representative of the community for a specific period of time. And we based it on 3 objectives, with the first that it should promote citizen participation in democracy, as already said before. The second, with facilitating a diverse environment for deliberation, which is focused more on policy instead of politics. And with the third, improving policy responsiveness and its quality. You already see on the slides the 4 phases of the community assembly that we designed, with the first training of participants, which should be based on critical thinking and the legislative system, so that we create a level playing field to start the discussion, which is happening in the second phase, the first deliberation. There we should not focus on party or politic lines. It should be more on having a groundbreaking discussion and coming up with new ideas and new solutions. After the first deliberation, we should have a public outreach, meaning that the people of the community assembly going out, representing their ideas, what they discussed before, and finding people who support them. As Jonathan Geib is also pointing out in his research, you need the support of the citizens if a community assembly should be successful. Therefore, we designed that every proposal needs 3% of signatures, and if you have these 3%, the proposal is handed over to civil servants who are revising this proposal in order to make it into a legislative language. With that, we come already to the fourth phase, the final deliberation, where the community assembly should revise the proposal, which has been worked on by the civil servants, and they hand this proposal to the local council for their deliberation. So once we get the support by the people, the local council has to discuss what the community assembly was proposing. And Franklin started with the sentence that our representative system is not working enough, or that was at least what we all started with. And we think that community assembly can be a way that we can regain trust from the people, and trust may be one of the most important thing in a democracy, and getting back active citizens who have the feeling that they can influence politics, that they can influence what is happening on the local level, on the national level, on the intergovernmental level. And with that, we can hopefully make our democracy stronger again.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Franklin and Francesca. So now we are opening up for discussion, and for you who are in the YouTube live stream, if you want to contribute a comment or a question, you send this to the email address you can see, but we will start in the room here, and I will ask, we have another youth fellow in the audience, Valeria, if you could be the person who hand around the microphone. That would be lovely. So do we have a starting comment from someone here in the room, or a question? And it may be to Folke, or to the Francesca, Lisa, or Franklin. Or it could be whatever kind of things that you want to relate to us and share with us. Yes.
Hi, thank you for an amazing talk. I'll stand where you can see me. My name's Jennifer, and I'm a politics and law student from Australia, and I'm here on exchange. And my question's about this separation between policy and politicisation, because I'm not sure how much you know about the last 2 years of Australian politics, but last year we had a referendum about Indigenous issues, a proposal which came from a mini public, effectively, and it was a great proposal, but it was rejected at referendum on party political lines. And I'm just wondering, in this model that you proposed, which I think is really good, how at the public, when you're consulting with the public, how are you going to tackle this issue of starting at a policy level, and as soon as you involve the wider sphere of the public, stop things from getting party political and then rejected for those along those lines?
Thank you. You want to take that one?
Yes. Wow, that's a tough question, but you're confronting us with the realities. I guess the first point I want to point out with your question is that this was something happening on the national level, right, in Australia, which of course makes it more difficult when it comes to party lines, because usually, or in most countries, national politics are just based on party lines, unfortunately. We designed this policy brief or this community assembly to start on a municipal level, because we have the feeling that we are more away from party lines, and that we can start with easy issues where the community, the local community, is confronted with. This sounds really unidealistic if I say that already at the beginning, but sometimes you have to try things on a local and on a small level first before going on the big scale. And especially the issue raised in Australia is so huge. I guess it's such a topic where you had really strong opposite lines fighting against each other, I guess, which makes it even harder. So we should not be devastated by seeing what is happening on national level, but maybe try to start on local and municipal level and figure out what are the strengths, what are the things we have to improve, and then going level up.
Thank you. More questions in the room? Yes, the microphone.
Thank you so much. My name is Emmanuel, a student in global studies. So my question goes to the first speaker on the possible solutions that you said, revitalizing local democracies. And this question complements to brother in between, sorry, I didn't get your name, on the divide and the gap. What's your take on how do we navigate or to bridge the gap between the way young people, especially in Europe, view or perceive their future towards, let's say, ontological security, whereas the older generation, let's say in Sweden, we have had a rising trend of welfare chauvinism, but the young people really don't care. And that is also the same case even in the US. So what's your take on how do you effectively revitalize the local participation, looking at the future of Europe? Thanks.
Yes, I wish I could give a good answer to that question. So if I understand you correctly, there's a generation gap. Yeah, and I think that's true. Young people are perhaps, I don't have the latest voting numbers in Sweden, but perhaps they vote less in some countries like the United States and so on and so forth. Yes. I think the key must be that, well, if you suspect that what underlies this lack of willingness to participate is the sense that what you are going to do is not going to influence anything, then that is what you need to address, I think. And I still think that these initiatives that Lisa talked about can help doing that. I also think that we should think about democracy as a thing you should be taught more in a different way in schools, in education. And I mean, we have that aim, I think, in Sweden, but I think we do it in a very old-fashioned way, and we need to find, perhaps, involve young people to develop new curricula for this type of education, for example. So since I'm so old, I don't have the answers. I think you have the answers, probably. Thank you for your question.
I could tap in very briefly on this question, because this August we are going to South Africa with our 6th youth conference, inviting African youth. And we know by numbers that Africa, the cleavage between young and old is drastically more broad and more problematic than it is in Europe. Because, well, the powerful ones in many African countries are very old, and most of them are men. And the young feel very, very distanced from any possibility of power. So I think, and that is one we have many good reasons, but one of the best reasons for going to Africa and organizing a youth conference is to learn even more about the thing, about the age cleavage and how that spells out in some African countries. I think that we could have time for a last question if there's someone who wanna, or a comment. Microphone. Close to the...
I have a question for the professor, and since you are working so closely with politics with research, I have more of like a personal question to you. Do you have hope in the new generation when it comes to politics and being more engaged? Because from my point of view, I study political science as well, and I have been so curious about that before I even started studying. And I had so many hopes and dreams, and just reading the title, Disenchantment, and what you, Franklin, has said about you are not going to vote. I think I will not be voting for the next elections here in Sweden, because why would I be giving up my vote for something that I really cannot change? So what is your personal take on hope in general?
Yeah, well, I think you need to be hopeful, of course, even if it could be difficult. But I think you need to work together with others that are hopeful, and you should nurture your own hope. But what gives me hope is the type of data that I talked about, for example. And take the disenchantment of democracy. I want to say something now about that. I got a paper yesterday about from the World Value Survey. And anyone can email me, and I'll send you the paper. And what it shows is that the support for democracy is, in fact, not that weak. There is a narrative in society to the effect that everything is going to hell, for example, with democracy and everything. But that is skewed. That's not correct. And if we really look at what people are saying, if we research this, we find evidence for another picture. And that gives me hope. So people, I mean, today, the trust in democratic institutions in mature democracies is higher than a few years ago. And that's not what we read in media. And it's higher also in all segments of the population, young people, older people, middle class, lower income classes, and so on and so forth. So this doom and gloom picture that we get from the media isn't the whole truth. And that's
an issue for the media, how the media is portraying.
Yeah, because, fear sells things. So a lot of actors just exploit that people, like when you hear some critical comment, that's what you're going to remember, not all the praise that you're. Our culture, our media culture, is fear-driven. But if you look at realities, it doesn't look that bad in the case of democracy, for example. And we need to remind ourselves of that.
What a remarkably positive thing to end the seminar, which is kind of focusing on problems. So thank you so much, Folke, Lisa, Franklin, and Francesca. And a little bit of a token of an appreciation. You will have a copy of this very newly printed volume with the title Towards a Sustainable World, Academic Insights and Perspectives. So this is written by some dozen of scholars who are at the School of Business, Economics and Law, where we are right now. And actually, I'm one of them. And the book was released last year because that was the school has been up and going for 100 years last year. So this is a celebration of the past 100 years and looking further ahead on what it could take from a School of Business, Economics and Law to do something good for the world. So to make it more sustainable. So I pass that to you, and thank you so much. And before we end this, I just want to first give you a slide, give you some credits. Thank Brännpunkt Europa with one of the beautiful logos that you recognize from the roll-up. Thanking the University of Gothenburg, where we are hosted today. Lindholmen Science Park, which is the host of the IYTT. And down below, we have in Swedish, thanking Gustav Adolf Bratts Föreläsningsfond, who is giving us funding for doing the traveling of our dear speakers. And the very last thing, on Wednesday, you will have the chance again, that will be our third seminar in the spring series. This is started off by Asli Seren Aslan, who is a Turkish journalist and author living in Sweden in exile because she had been imprisoned several times in Turkey. So the theme of next week's Wednesday lunch seminar is about truth and the role of journalists and how we could keep up the integrity of journalists. So come and listen to Seren and to other youth fellows who will present the IYTT proposals on how to keep up the integrity of journalists. You have found us today. You know how you will find us for the next seminar. So thank you for being here today in the room and in the live stream, and very welcome back on Wednesday. Thank you.